Right now, as you sit there, perhaps with a cup of coffee in your hand or leaning back in your favorite chair, there is a bird in your yard that knows exactly who you are. I'm not talking about some vague, instinctive animal sense where they just react to a large moving object in their peripheral vision. I'm not talking about the simple outline of a human figure standing near a feeder. I mean something much more profound and, frankly, a little bit startling. That bird knows your face. It has been watching you, specifically you, with a level of detail and consistency that most people would find hard to believe. Every single time you have stepped out onto your porch, walked down your driveway, or spent a few minutes pulling weeds in the garden, those tiny, sharp eyes have been filing away data points. They've noted the way you walk, the sound of your voice, and even the subtle patterns of your daily life. Depending on what that bird has concluded about your character and your intentions, it might be reacting to your presence at this very moment in ways you haven't even noticed yet. Welcome, Bird Mind. If this is your first time joining us, I'm so glad you're here. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what we're going to dive into today is going to fundamentally shift the way you look at every single feathered visitor that lands on your fence or visits your bird bath. Today, we are exploring a topic that many people find genuinely difficult to wrap their heads around the first time they hear it. Birds are watching you. They aren't just fluttering around randomly. They aren't passive observers of the landscape. They are active participants in a social world that includes you. They possess real recognition, sophisticated memory, and very clear intentions. We're going to walk through 8 specific signs that the birds in your yard have been studying you. We'll talk about what they've decided about you and what that means for the quiet, invisible relationship that is forming between you and the wildlife just outside your window. We're going to wrap things up with something that I think a lot of you will find deeply moving, because it touches on the emotional core of why we love birds. Not just what they can remember, but what they might be trying to communicate to us in our darkest hours. Make sure you stay with me until the end, because sign number 6 involves something that researchers didn't even think was biologically possible until very recently. And then there's sign number 8, the one that changes absolutely everything about how we perceive the bridge between our world and theirs. Sign number 1, the birds arrive before you've even done anything. You know that specific feeling? You haven't even touched the bag of birdseed yet. You haven't opened the back door or made a single sound that would tip them off. And yet, when you glance out the kitchen window, there they are. A pair of chickadees are already waiting on the exact branch closest to where you always stand when you refill the feeder. A cardinal is perched at the edge of the yard, perfectly still, facing the house as if waiting for a curtain to rise. Most people brush this off as a simple coincidence. They think, oh, they must just be hungry, or they're always there. But it is not a coincidence. In one particularly famous long-term field study, crows living near a suburban feeding site were observed to anticipate a specific caretaker's arrival up to 12 minutes before she actually stepped outside. They weren't just waiting. They were adjusting their physical positions in the yard and calling to one another in a very specific pattern. The researchers eventually realized that these vocalizations were distinct from any other calls the crows made. They had a caretaker is coming call. Interestingly, this behavior didn't happen when any other person walked through the area. If a neighbor or a stranger passed by, the crows remained neutral or cautious. But for her, they prepared. What this means for you is simple. If birds are already oriented toward your yard when you step outside, if they seem to be expecting you, that is a feat of memory. It is a sign of recognition. They have integrated you into their daily mental model of how the world works. You have become a landmark in their lives, and your arrival has a specific, weighted meaning to them. When you realize that a tiny creature with a brain the size of a pea is planning its morning around your routine, the warmth of that connection is truly remarkable. Let's try a little experiment. Imagine a stranger comes into your yard, maybe a delivery driver, a neighbor you don't know well, or a relative visiting for the first time. Watch the birds.
In almost every situation, the birds will instinctively pull back. They'll stop singing, the feeder will suddenly go quiet, and they will retreat into the cover of the bushes. Even after the stranger leaves, the birds will often wait for several minutes, sometimes up to 10 or 15, just to make sure the coast is clear before they return to their business. But now, think about what happens when you go out. If you have been a consistent, calm presence in your yard, the birds often don't even flinch. Some of them will keep right on eating while you're only a few feet away. Others might hop to a slightly higher branch just to give you some space, but they won't flush or fly away in a panic. This categorical difference in response is one of the most telling signs of recognition. People often assume birds react to smell or the sound of footsteps, and while those things matter, the primary driver here is visual recognition.
The science behind this is more rigorous than most people realize. A landmark study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, used researchers wearing different rubber masks to test whether American crows could distinguish between a face they'd learned to associate with a threat, someone who had previously trapped and banded them, versus a neutral face. The results were staggering. Not only did the crows identify and scold the threatening face every single time, but they did so even when the person wearing the mask changed their clothes, their height, their gait, or wore a different hat. Even more incredible was that crows who had never actually met the dangerous researcher began avoiding them too. They had learned from the older crows. The memory of a specific human face had actually spread through the entire local population like a piece of high-priority gossip. For the birds in your backyard, you are a face in their database. You aren't just a human. You are the human who lives here. The fact that they stay near you while others cause them to flee tells you everything you need to know about how you've been categorized. You have been vetted and approved. Sign number 3. They make direct eye contact. This sign is subtle, and if you aren't looking for it, you'll miss it every time. But once you start noticing it, it becomes impossible to ignore. The next time you're standing still near a feeder, maybe you're just watching a chickadee, a nuthatch, or a house finch, pay close attention to its head movements. At some point, the bird will stop what it's doing. It will pause its frantic seed cracking, turn its head, and look directly at your face.
I'm not talking about a sweeping scan of the yard where they're looking for hawks. I'm talking about a direct, deliberate focus on your eyes. They may hold that gaze for 2 or 3 seconds before returning to their meal. Now, you have to remember that for birds with eyes on the sides of their heads, looking at something directly requires a very intentional turn of the neck to bring one eye forward into a high focus position. This is an intentional act of observation. In a world where birds are constantly at risk of being eaten, taking a moment to stop scanning for predators and focus entirely on a human is a massive investment of attention.
Ornithologists have noted that birds who are highly familiar with a specific person often engage in what is known as investigative orientation. They position themselves to get the clearest possible monocular view of that individual, especially if the person is doing something new. If you're wearing a bright new jacket, carrying a ladder, or even just walking with a limp you didn't have yesterday, watch for this. They notice the change. There is something profoundly moving about being truly seen by a creature the size of your fist. If a bird at your feeder looks you in the eye, it isn't a random twitch. It is checking in on you. It is verifying that you are still the same safe person it knows. Sign number 4. They track your movements throughout the yard. This one requires a bit of patience to observe, but once you see it, the realization is unmistakable. Go outside and walk a winding path through your yard. Don't go straight to the feeder. Walk from the back door to a garden bed, then over to a far corner, then back toward the house. If the birds in your yard truly know you, many of them will reorient their bodies as you move. A cardinal that was originally facing east will slowly pivot on its branch to keep its chest toward you. A blue jay might shift its weight, hopping from one twig to another just to maintain a clear line of sight without having to fly away.
This is what scientists call subject tracking. It's a core part of how birds monitor the key individuals in their environment. Obviously, they track predators this way, but they also track safe individuals, because the behavior of a safe person is still vital information. If you suddenly start acting strangely, moving erratically, reaching toward a nest, or making sudden lunges, the bird wants to know about it immediately. The fascinating implication here is that you are on a mental watch list. Not a list of enemies, but a list of meaningful actors in their world. You are a known quantity, and their internal model of you updates every single time you appear. In crows, this tracking behavior is documented with terrifying precision. Individual crows in urban environments have been observed maintaining awareness of 3 or 4 specific humans simultaneously. They track where those people are, which direction they are moving, and they even update their predictions about what those humans are likely to do next based on past behavior. That level of social monitoring requires a high degree of cognitive sophistication. It means that to the birds, you aren't just a part of the scenery, you are a character in the story of their day.
Sign number 5. They have literally told other birds about you. This is where things get truly remarkable, and it's a concept that changes the way you think about the neighborhood aspect of your yard. If a single bird in your yard has learned to recognize you and has classified you as a reliable source of food or a safe presence, there is strong evidence to suggest that this information has been shared with other birds, including birds who have never even seen you before. This was first rigorously documented in the crow studies I mentioned earlier. Researchers observed what they called the social learning of human identity. Young crows, or juveniles, who had never had a personal encounter with a specific person, began displaying the exact same avoidance or approach behaviors as the adults. They didn't have to learn through trial and error. They learned through cultural transmission. The adults told them who was okay and who wasn't.
But this sharing isn't limited to crows. Small songbirds have an incredibly complex neighborhood watch system. Chickadees, for instance, have alarm calls that are basically a coded language. They can embed information about the type of predator, its size, and how fast it's moving directly into the structure of their chickadee-dee-dee call. Other species, like nuthatches, titmice, and even vireos, eavesdrop on these calls and adjust their behavior based on what the chickadees are saying. If a chickadee sees you approach and either stays silent or makes a soft contact call, that signals calm. Every other bird within earshot receives that information. Your reputation in your yard is not a private matter between you and one bird. It is a distributed piece of data across a network of animals who are constantly communicating. When the birds in your yard keep eating peacefully as you walk by, it isn't just individual comfort. It's a collective endorsement. They have, in a very real sense, vouched for you to the rest of the community. Now, we're getting into the territory that researchers didn't even think was possible until quite recently. We've known for a long time that jays and crows are geniuses. They use tools, they plan for the future, and they can remember thousands of different locations where they've hidden food. But what started emerging from long-term observations of wild birds in suburban areas was something much more human than simple survival. In several documented cases, crows that were regularly fed by specific families began leaving objects at or near the feeding stations. These weren't just random pieces of trash. They were specific items: a smooth river stone, a piece of shiny foil, a bit of colorful bark, or even a lost button. One of the most famous cases involved a young girl who fed the crows in her garden. They began leaving her a collection of treasures on the very table where she left their food.
Scientists are still debating whether this is gift-giving in the way humans define it, or if it's a form of reciprocal exchange, or even a behavioral quirk. But what is not in question is that it is intentional. The birds aren't just dropping things, they are placing them. They are responding to receiving something, food, by returning something, an object. It is a reciprocal relationship. If you have ever found an oddly placed object near your feeder, a strange pebble on a clean porch, a piece of glass tucked into a crevice, or a twig set apart from the others, I want you to stop and really look at it.
don't just sweep it away as yard debris. You might have just been given a gift. It is the bird's way of acknowledging the connection. It is an act of social bonding that crosses the species barrier. Sign number 7. Their alarm calls around you have shifted.
This is something you can actually test tomorrow morning. Birds generally produce 2 main categories of sound when humans are around. First, there are alarm calls, sharp, urgent, high-pitched sounds designed to warn everyone that a threat is present. Then there are contact calls, softer, more conversational sounds that essentially mean, "I'm here, everything is fine, keep doing what you're doing." The ratio of these 2 sounds in your yard is the ultimate verdict on your character. In a yard where the human is unknown or viewed as a potential predator, the alarm calling spikes the moment you step outside. You'll hear those short, punchy chips or the thin, high-pitched seat call that many small birds use. The seat call is fascinating because it's a ventriloquist sound. It's very hard for a hawk to pinpoint where it's coming from, but every bird in the bushes hears it loud and clear.